Good evening and welcome back to Historical Light. We have a really special secret broadcast this evening from the Grand Lodge of Kansas Annual Communications. We have some wonderful guests with us that's going to share a nice conversation and some brown liquid as well. So stick with us. We have an amazing episode lined up for you right after this on Historical Light.
Welcome back to the Historical Light Masonic Podcast, dedicated to illuminating our past and bringing our Masonic history to light since 2016. And now, enjoy the show.
Good evening and welcome back to Historical Light, an independent Masonic show focused on the historical events and aspects within Freemasonry. I'm, of course, your host, Alex Powers. Pleased to be back with you. And we have some amazing guests with us tonight here live on location at the Grand Lodge of Kansas. Brother James Jack, all the way from Scotland. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
We have most worshipful Brother Cole Presley.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for being here. And Patrick Craddock himself, the Apron Man.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for being here, brothers.
For the record, folks that are watching, we just crashed this. Yes. We just scheduled guests.
So we found out how to lure in Masons. And apparently if you have some brown liquid, doesn't matter what type it is, they just see brown liquid undefined on a table, they will come and they will talk. We also have another luring guest right behind us. Got to get him on camera here. The brand new Grand Master of Kansas himself. But that's true. That's true. Not installed yet. So we'll say right worshipful for now. Brother Robert McClarty for a few more hours. Thank you so much for being here, brother.
Absolutely. Just thought I'd stick my head in, say hi, tell you guys how much I appreciate everything you do for Kansas Masonry. All the way from Scotland to way out in western Kansas to everything you do for us in Kentucky. Brothers, you have a great night. I'll talk to you soon. You guys enjoy the show.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Well, brothers, we've had a quite exciting couple days so far, full day today. What are you guys thinking? Brother, you've come down from Scotland for, I don't even know how many years now. I see you down here every single year. How many years have you been coming to Kansas? 10 years? At least? Halloran, okay. So one thing most people say about Kansas is we're a flyover state, and a lot of people are trying to get away from here versus coming here. What the heck do you keep coming here for?
Well, that's what Michael Allen said to me when I met him. It's
Makes
quite an
sense.
interesting story. I had been corresponding with Michael for a number of years. He was writing a book on Freemasonry. And Freemasonry in the American Civil War. And I was at Gettysburg for the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. And we had a research lodge in Virginia, original member. We had a meeting in the field at Gettysburg. And the guy standing next to me happened to be Michael Allen. Never met him, he had never met me. And he was absolutely astonished. And I asked him what position he was in the Grand Lodge and things were going to Grand Lodge, and he said he was deputy master of the Grand Lodge of Kansas. And I said, what's the future bring? And he said, well, if everything goes according to plan, hopefully I'll be Grand Master next year. And I said, I think I'd like to go to that. So I came over to Kansas and attended his installation. And I've made a lot of friends, and I've been coming back forward since. So that was a story that never knew.
That's fantastic.
And he said at that time, he said, when it comes to Kansas, it's the States. And I said, I'll certainly come if I can.
And that first year that James came over, no one could understand it.
And still can't understand it.
can't understand you.
Hey, we got Yvette Powers here, who's usually the one sharing us out. Can you come tilt the camera just slightly this way? We get everyone in the shot better. So we've got another one.
I heard there was brown liquid here.
I got just some brown liquid. So we got another one here. As you guys all know, most worshipful Mikel Stoops. Thank you so much for being back. And it's funny to have him back because we just lost this guy. Right? A little bit.
Well, he's a Scotsman.
Oh,
You remember him, Mother Lodge?
Last year, Brad 579, Uddingston.
there we go.
Got the Showerman Award.
Well, he came back for Grand Lodge of Kansas, 167th annual communication.
Yeah.
And, well, same thing. We had some brown liquid on the table and he moseyed in. We're going to need some more brown liquid because we got more guys moseying in. This guy also bought something really, really cool tonight. We had I'm sorry? Music's still playing. Got you guys. We're not in our usual place. Obviously, I'm an amateur. Sorry. Music's still playing in the background.
Well, it's Kellerman when you need him.
Where is he? No. But anyways, we just had a charity auction here for the Grand Lodge of Kansas. And Brother Stoops bought something rather interesting and paid some fine money for it.
Right.
What did
Right.
you end up yielding this evening?
Well, Tunnick's Bakery, Brother Boyd Tunnick's, brother Sir Boyd Tunnick's, right? Sir? Yeah, brother of my lodge in Scotland. He owns a bakery and they make caramel wafers.
Yep.
And they're amazing chocolate caramel wafers. And they just came out with a new product, which are twice as big as the standard caramel wafer. And so, a caramel wafer, the way I figured it is like what, £1.75 for a caramel wafer.
No.
So no, less.
A lot less.
Oh well.
50p.
So anyway, I figured a
Maybe
double.
robbed.
I figured a double size one was worth at least $175. So yeah,
That sounds
so,
about the transition.
yeah. It's
for sure.
two big caramel wafers
Yeah.
for $350. But then I had to give them away because somebody threatened to tell my wife I spent $350 on caramel wafers, and I had to bribe her with caramel wafers. So off they went.
This is live, actually.
That's
So-
okay.
Oh, okay. Just making sure it's on record.
No,
now. We actually
yeah.
don't broadcast to Ireland, so I think we might.
Yeah,
be.
she's in St.
No,
Louis. I might be in
she's
trouble.
I think
No,
you
there's
missed
brown-
the.
There's brown liquid.
I think you missed the exchange rate on that, Stoops.
There you go. Brother Cole Presley,
Sir.
thank you so much for being here. Obviously, you've been a part of this for a long time, past Grand Master, Grand
I'm
Secretary
getting
now.
a text. I may be in
Oh.
trouble.
Uh-oh.
Aye.
Yeah.
One big chair. So if you wouldn't mind, you've been along Kansas Masonry for quite a long time. Share a little bit about your experience with this 167th annual communication, why it's so important to be here.
Well, any annual communication for any Kansas Mason is always important to attend, if for no other reason than to improve your Masonic network, to learn what other lodges are doing for their communities. That's the big push behind our lodges, right? Is to find a way to become an asset to our communities in a beneficial way. So let's not reinvent the wheel every time. Let's go learn what other lodges are doing. From my hat as the Grand Treasurer, this is always an important event because it helps me to lock in our fiscal planning for the future, to understand where we're going, learn about what's going to be required to get there, and then to explain to our members what we need to have to get that done. Today was a big day for us with that because we needed to make some changes into our per capita tax, which is always a dicey conversation to have when elected leaders are asking for more money. It's no different than a politician asking for more money and then telling you to trust them with it. This today was the same way. This was one of the first times where we had very little counter argument to what we were asking for, and the craft understood it and set us up for success in the future. So today for me was a big day because we're going to get to move forward in a whole lot easier fashion than what we've been set up for.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think we made a lot of good decisions and a lot of progress today. So
Yes.
it was definitely good to be there. Brother Patrick Craddock, you're another one that is no stranger to Kansas Masonry. Kansas Mason, actually, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you keep
Hancock
coming
311.
back. Keep coming back every year. What is it that brings you to Kansas, and what is the importance you see being in an annual communication like this?
Oh, well, as most people probably recognize me for what I do now with the Craftsmans Apron. And I come to Kansas every year, not only because of the friendships that I have made among Kansas Masons, but because the Grand Lodge of Kansas was the first grand jurisdiction that gave me an opportunity when I was new in business. And ever since that opportunity, I've had very close friends in the Grand Lodge, and I make a decision every year to come and support the direction of the Grand Lodge of Kansas, and to continue to give back to them as I can what they offered me when I got started in business.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you being here, brother. And, you know, one of the things that stands out to me, and it really correlates with my view on Masonry, is part of what you do with your business. And I really admire that, because when I see you out there at your table, I see quality, I see respect given back to the craft. And it's not about a buck. It's about really honoring and respecting, and you're giving that quality back. And I was reminded of this morning, actually. I think I shared this story with you because all my ties are Craddock ties, but I did not have a green Craddock tie. And for St. Patrick's Day, I had to get one. So I got the Amazon tie, and I had the hardest time tying this today. And I said, it's just not that Patrick Craddock quality tie. So I might have to come visit you tomorrow, man.
I'll be there.
If you just
Bring your friends.
If you just plug that Craddock ties tie themselves, we're getting up and walking.
Coming soon.
So tomorrow there's a special. So normally the Craddock ties are $50 a piece, but tomorrow, just for you, Alex, we're going to run a special. 2 ties for $110.
Got to get in on that.
Come on down to Unpainted Aprons. We got.
Well, so, you know, we cover a lot of history on the show. And while we've got Craddock sitting here, that is one really cool factor, because we've got a lot of regalia that we see in Freemasonry today, both from Masons and non-Masons all around, especially if you're even anything related to Masonry today. You just get blasted on social media with all kinds of stuff from everywhere. And it's questionable quality, questionable origins. But a big aspect of what you do with your products is historical based, which really rings home to me. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to get you back on for another episode to really cover the in-depth history there. But what is it about Masonic history that impacted how you wanted to approach your business model?
So principally, it's craftsmanship.
Yeah.
When I started this business, I was looking for something that I wanted to wear and wasn't finding anything. And so, you know, as I tell everyone with what I do in business, Freemasonry has given me too much for me to give garbage back to it. And I'm not going to do that. Freemasonry has really been important to me in different ages of my life. It's been what I needed at that time. And for that reason, my commitment to craft masonry is reflected in the quality products that I produce. I'm not willing to cheapen the Masonic experience by offering a less than quality product. But the historical connection that you asked there is the craftsmanship. Because when I look at historic things, the 80, 100, 200 years old, and I look at the detail and the craftsmanship that went into making those artifacts, whether it was a watch fob or a ring or a jewel or an apron or a collar or whatever, they were very finely crafted.
Right.
It wasn't the desire to get the cheapest possible thing that our forefathers had. They wanted to celebrate their commitment to masonry and to show that commitment with a quality piece, not necessarily the cheapest possible product that can be produced.
Right. You know, that's an interesting aspect that, you know, we look back at masonry anywhere, especially even here in Kansas, and it kind of makes me reflect on what Brother Cole Presley was talking about today and some of the financial obligations that we're approaching. historically, Masons invested a lot more. I mean, just degree fees were quite up there.
Yes.
And that's not even getting to your membership fees. And that's not even getting into what they invested into their temples that we're now losing today. There was a lot of value placed into Freemasonry. And then unfortunately, we see today where we're talking about dollars, like individual dollars, and it turns into a huge discussion on the floor.
Yeah.
Brother Cole, what do you think about that?
So what I think is that at least here in Kansas, we're not changing. We're going back to what it is that really has mattered. And it's a byproduct of a couple of things. One, it's a focus back on what we're called for and called to do as Kansas Masons. And the second is, as we all know, unfortunately, membership is declining at a rapid rate.
Yeah.
Mostly because we're seeing the older generation pass on. That's crude to say, but factually, that's what's occurring. But what we're being left with in terms of the members who are staying are the ones who see the value of craft masonry for what it is. And I believe, well, I wholeheartedly believe that within a short period of time, you're going to see the Grand Lodge structure itself in a way that's no longer arguing about dollars.
Right.
It's going to be a conversation of, here's our focus, here are our specific projects, here's our mission, and here's how we're going to achieve it. And the craft's going to say, yes, go get it done. And then we're going to come back and say, okay, here's what it's going to cost to do it. And we move forward. And so instead of saying, if you give me a couple of dollars more, I can go do this, it's going to be the craft saying, we need our leadership to be doing A, B, and C. And now here's the funding to go get it done.
That makes a lot of sense.
And it's where it should be.
Right.
We've got some procedural work to do. We've got some bylaw work to do to get us back into that position, some education for it. But when you look at the character of Kansas Masons now compared to where we were 20 years ago, we're going to be there, and we're going to be in a position of thriving and not surviving as Kansas Masons. I'm excited for it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's honestly, one of those forks in the road that we have to make that decision of, are we going to make this work or are we going to give it up? Because, if we're not here to support it, it's going to crumble as we see our buildings and our history and stuff doing around us. So it's kind of a now or never. Brother Jack, I'm sitting here wondering, is this an American issue? Do you guys face this type of stance in Scotland?
Yeah, very similar problems, financial problems, Masonic temples, maintenance of them, the upkeep of them, fees to Grand Lodge. Our fee to our annual fee that we'd pay, the minimum Grand Lodge annual fee is about £40 a member.
Okay.
That's probably about $45, something like $50 a year.
Sure.
The problem is increasing that if you need to increase it, because there will be, I was going to say unrest, and I think perhaps that's the right word, because if you to say you're going to put up the annual fee by £10, there may well be unrest. There might be riots in the street if you put it from £40 up to £50 or up to £60 a year.
Right.
So we had a wee think about it, and what we thought was, we have increased our fees almost by stealth. And what we did was, we had a standing order scheme with the bank. So I don't know if you've got standing order schemes here by the bank or no, but what you do is you put out a standing order scheme and you can pay so much a month into that.
Okay.
So that started off with maybe half a dozen of the brethren, and they would put in £10 a month. £10 a month times 12, and all of a sudden you're paying annual fees of £120. So your £40 pays your first £40 pays your annual fee, and anything that's left goes into the lodge general funds.
Interesting.
So you've increased the fees by stealth, and now we've got about 40 members in our lodge who pay their annual fee by standing order.
Okay.
So the minimum is normally about £10 a month. So if you add that up, that's quite a lot of money that's going into the general fund.
Sure.
And it's not just we're collecting £40 and passing it on to Grand Lodge.
Right.
So we've increased the fee, but if we had said, well, we're going to increase the fee from £40 to £120, but don't worry, we're going to send £40 to Grand Lodge and the rest go into the general fund, then there may well have been riots in the street, you know. And we've done it to almost by stealth.
Yeah.
And we've got some brethren who put in more than £10 a month. And it's quite incredible what we draw in. And the balance sheet, you know, you can see on the balance sheet paid by standing order. So there's quite a bit there.
Oh, that's fantastic here.
Yeah.
That's great insight. And especially how you guys have taken more of a strategic manner of going about that than I think a lot of lodges do.
I think as far as finance goes, I'm a member of a number of lodges in Scotland, and it varies. It varies quite considerably. £40 is the minimum fee we pay to Grand Lodge per member, but that can go up to £60 or £70 in some cases for lodges.
For sure. We have here a guest on the YouTube side saying, add to this fact that the wages have stagnated since the 70s. Masonry began in rented tavern lofts and will likely return there as the West becomes more poor. It's an interesting concept. Brother Craddock, what do you think about the outside or the onside of that?
Oh, I think we're seeing it definitely. I've worked with a number of lodges and jurisdictions who have chartered new lodges in the last 5 years that are specifically designed to not own lodge property.
Yeah.
They are shedding that financial burden that they probably cannot, and shouldering the burden of just paying for when they need to go somewhere and set up for a lodge meeting instead of owning that property.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see that going back to public places where we can tile and meet an open lodge.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting concept because, when you look back at that tavern era of Masonry, it wasn't this Masonic law. It was a tavern, and we were using a space there.
Right.
And, unfortunately, we're seeing the price of everything in the world go up, and lodges are struggling just to pay the property taxes for these very buildings.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at a certain point, something definitely has to give, and we've got to be more strategic about what we do, especially when you consider when we can't afford even the property taxes. That's not general maintenance or upkeep.
That's right.
And then it brings in the fact that what the public sees of Masonry at that point, because they don't always see our annual communications like this and how we function as a craft. What they see is that physical representation that and oftentimes it's falling apart and crumbling in front of society.
And that's one of the things that that are starting to be noticed is that a lodge is not the building.
Right.
Now, I hate, as a historic preservationist, to see us lose some of these beautiful edifices.
Indeed.
But when it comes down to practicing masonry, that's not masonry.
Right.
That's a building.
And it's an impact to visible perceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As much as we love our old buildings and the history behind them, if they're in disrepair and falling apart, that's the visible impression that the world sees about craft masonry. But if we're renting public spaces and we're showing up and we're appropriately attired, and then the work that comes out of those lodge meetings is what the public sees. They're no longer seeing a rundown old building as a fraternity. They're now seeing the work that we have done.
I think on the same subject, there's possibly 3 different ways to look at it. Our lodge in 579, our building in 579 is 100 years old next year. We're the only lodge that meet in that building. We meet twice a month. Another aspect is a lodge that would rent property, possibly from another lodge. And when the meeting's finished, pack their stuff away, and that's them away for 2 weeks or maybe even longer. And then there's the other aspect of it, almost like what you might find quite commonly in England, where you have a Masonic hall with dining facilities and a bar, which is not unlike what we've got in Uddingston, a big hall, but that would be run as a business.
Sure, yeah.
And you would probably have lodges and other organisations meeting in there every night of the week.
Right.
And the lodge would appoint a director to sit on the board, and the board of directors would run the property as a business and make sure that the finances of the building were intact and the building was up to standard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's difficult from our point of view in 579 because our building is a beautiful building.
Right.
And when I joined the lodge in 1974, it's exactly the way that it's been described, that it was not in good condition. It needed a lot of work done to it. And basically, if you had gone in there for the first time, you'd have come away with a bad impression.
Right.
So we have worked at that over a number of years, and we've worked on it recently because we're coming up to the centenary next year. And I would say that our property's probably looking as good now as it has been all the time I've been in the lodge. We've spent money on it, we've spent time on it. But if your lodge owns a property, you've got to have the brethren in the right frame of mind to upkeep that property and do work on it.
Agreed. Yeah.
And if you've not got an active core of brethren, you might have 50 members in your lodge who attend regularly, but unless you've got 10 of those guys that are dedicated to look after the property and do the work when it's needing done, then your property will gradually decline.
That's a fantastic point. Now, I want to make sure we work in this amazing book that we have sitting here. We're going to learn a little bit about that, but I want to flow with this conversation because some really interesting aspects are getting brought up, and it's making me think some things here. So to bridge into this, because we're talking about these aged historic buildings that have meant so much to us. Scotland is one of the places in the world that has so many amazing historical sites, right? So you guys have, I guess, this weight of responsibility, much more than places like Kansas do. However, we see around Kansas, like for one example, our Grand Lodge building, we no longer own that. It's out of our control. Yeah. But now to the public eye, it's in pretty rough shape. Yeah. We're seeing in Lawrence, we've got another historic Masonic temple there that actually my grandfather and my uncle were raised. And unfortunately, it's being well upkept, and it's not so much the business model that's being ran, but as was brought up in the annual communication today, part of the advertising for a business there is advertising the Masonic temple as the gateway to hell. How do we approach the buildings that we no longer own, yet that representation or that image that it portrays upon us?
Well, I think that that's difficult because we don't own the property anymore. The property's been sold over to someone else, and it's their responsibility either to upkeep it, to convert it into something else, or demolish it.
Sure. Yeah.
We in our province, there was a Masonic Hall in Motherwell. It was sold within the last year, and really that had been run down. It was a 4-story building, and the temple was in the 4th story. So anybody over the age of 60 had difficulty getting up to the meeting.
Right.
No lift, stairs all the way, and the local council bought it over because of a new road development. So they were going to demolish it. So that was perhaps the best thing to do. It just come literally to the end of its lifetime.
Definitely.
And that's what happened. Going back a bit, and you were talking about lodges met in taverns and pubs and one thing and another. My own lodge, St. Bride, we met in a small hall above the Two Chimneys pub. These two guys are familiar with the Two Chimneys pub.
Oh.
And they met up there. The very first meeting was held in the Magdala Hall, which was up above the Two Chimneys pub. But we turned a corner because we moved from there to the Royal Buildings, which are at Eastern Cross, and then laterally in the public halls. But throughout that time, there was always a desire within the lodge to try and own their own property.
Okay.
And I think what really gelled that together was the First World War.
Yeah.
Because In the First World War, after the First World War, there were so many men coming back from the First World War that they were looking for something, and the membership of the craft in Scotland and probably other places just exploded. You know, hundreds of lodges were formed, chartered, you know, but at that particular time, they moved to build their own Masonic Hall. And that Masonic Hall, as far as we were concerned, was almost a memorial to the guys that went to the war. It was 1924, but they actually started actively looking for property to build as the war was going on. You know,
Right.
You know, which was, when you think about that, then after that, the Depression, you know, it was just astonishing that they were raising money to spend, you know, £3,500 in 1924 was a lot of money, but that's what it cost to build their property.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So on that topic, your own son has done some amazing research.
Yeah, Stuart. Yeah.
So
And
tell us,
these guys know Stuart. They've met Stuart.
yeah,
Yep.
tell us a little bit about what he's done here with this book.
Well, this was a book that he's written. It's The Great War, Lodge and Bride 579, The Great War, 1914, 1918. I'm particularly proud of him for producing this book. And this all happened. We were coming back from a meeting one night down in Ayrshire, and we're talking in the car. And he asked the question, we've not got a war memorial in our lodge. Why have we not got a war memorial? And I had written the history of the lodge in the 1980s, 1982 or something like that. And I said, well, it's difficult because in the lodge minutes, they mentioned things about the First World War. They mentioned about guys are going to, even our master at that time was called up and went. The wardens went. We lost the master and the wardens at that time called up to go. And they used to write in the minutes that we've sent packets of cigarettes and things over to our brother in the front. We used to get letters back thanking us for things that we'd sent over. And he said, why have we not got a war memorial? We don't know why we've not got a war memorial. We had a memorial service in 1922 for the guys that died. We've got 6 members of our lodge who died in the First World War, and they had a memorial. We've got a printed programme for the memorial, but it doesn't actually tell you in the programme who we're remembering.
Right.
No names on it. And I think the fear was that if we mention names, we'll miss somebody out. You know, we'll not get a complete list.
Don't want him to be forgotten.
So he said, I'm going to start and I'm going to have a look into that and see what I can come up with.
Sure.
In the way of members who were in the First World War. And he had a great advantage, because I told him at the time that if he was doing research, you had to cross-reference from two sources.
Yeah.
To confirm something, you had to cross-reference from 2 sources. So the advantage that he had was that we have a rule book going back to the first members of the lodge in 1876. So everyone that's joined our lodge since 1876 is in that rule book. And it gives you their age, their occupation, their full name, their address, and when they were initiated, passed and raised. And that's confirmed as a reference, a source of reference.
Definitely.
So what you had to do then was find out who amongst these guys were in the forces during that time, from the First World War, 1418. So he was looking at military records, he was looking at the census that was taken around about that time, and gradually cross-referenced guys that were members of the lodge and had fought in the army or the other. And that's how he built this up. He's got about 90 members of our lodge, which he's identified as being in the forces, and six killed. Some of the stories are remarkable. One of our members, for example, Joseph Reed, was captured. He was in a prisoner of war camp for nearly 4 years. While he was in the prisoner of war camp, the lodge looked after his wife and his 3 kids. And the remarkable story was that I think at that particular time, if you had been prisoner for 3 years, they had a repatriation program. And the Allies were repatriated in Holland, which was neutral, and the Germans were repatriated into Switzerland, which was neutral. A bit like the American Civil War, they traded off
Sure.
prisoners,
Yeah.
and they had to sign away saying that they wouldn't participate in the war again. While he was in Holland, he was a founder member of a Masonic lodge in Holland, a prisoner of war lodge called Willem van Orange, and it was number 118 under the Grand East of the Netherlands. At the end of the war, that lodge transferred to the United Grand Lodge England and still meets.
Is that right?
Still meets in London to this day. And we went down to the centenary in 2018, and we were the only members there who could directly link back to a founder member. He was a member of Lodge St Bride, and he was one of their first office bearers in the lodge. So that was the type of information that he was coming up with in this book. And even more remarkable, we found out that our members were really in Russia during the First World War, all down through Europe, Belgium, France,
Wow.
Northern Italy, Egypt, Palestine, Iraq, Iran.
That's
You know,
quite the
it's-
reach.
It's really quite incredible.
Yeah.
We explored that even further, and the stories that come back were just amazing. Stuart tracked down a guy that was killed in the First World War. He found out where he was buried, and there was 8 of us went over to visit his grave. And when we went over to visit his grave, we took a wreath with us and we held a service at his grave
Wow.
and remembrance of our brother. And that was quite remarkable. That was the first one that we'd actually identified and where he was buried. And we said, look, if we come up with anyone else, we really need to take this forward and try
Most
and
definitely.
go and visit again. And much to our surprise, he came up with another one that he identified that had been killed and he was buried. But can you imagine where he was buried? Israel.
Is that right?
It was Palestine at that time, but he was killed in Palestine and he was buried in Beersheba, which is now
Wow.
in Israel. So it was 4 of us went over to Israel and did the same. We took a wreath over us and we had a service at his grave.
That's
And
amazing.
that's what this book's produced. This produced a lot of interest in our guys. But the most important thing about this book is that was just over 100 years ago that this
Right.
happened.
Right.
And it's got into the mists of time. Stuart's captured this information and it's now in print. These guys are now recognised for what they did, and some of the horror stories that came out of the First World War. He's captured these guys that were involved in these horror stories, you know, and the horrors that they went through to make our country the way it is just now. If he hadn't written this book, going on in the future, the stories that are in this book would gradually have drifted away and we would have lost them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I cannot wait to dig into this. Just hearing about the depth of research that he did.
Oh,
for this.
I mean, the research that he's put into that was just incredible. I mean, he flew to London. He wanted to try and get a hold of the absent voters register. You all know what that is, but the absent voters register was part of the census. But if it came to the house to do the census, and your father or your brother or your uncle wasn't there, then they would need to fill in where he was.
Right.
So it would be on it that he was in active service.
Okay.
So that was the absent voters register. Now our parish is Bothwell Parish, which takes in a reasonable size area. So he thought he had nothing else to do but go to a local library and pull that out. They didn't have it. And sent him into the Mitchell Library in Glasgow. They didn't have it. They sent him to Edinburgh, to the National Library in Edinburgh. They didn't have it. And they tracked down that it was in the National Library in London. And he flew down to London. You need to arrange to get the books out of the library and you're coming to see them. The day before he was due to fly, they said they couldn't guarantee that they actually had the books he was looking for. And he wasn't sure whether he was going to go or no, so we persuaded him to go. And when he went down there, they pulled out the books. They had actually more books than he was expecting for this
Is that right?
Absent voters roll. And that ticked a lot of boxes because they had a list of names. He went down the list of names and everybody that had a active service next to it. Then he took a note of the name and he came back with their address and come back and checked against their roll and the lodge roll. And that was a confirmation. So he picked up a lot of guys for the absent voters roll as well.
Sounds like there is a ton of research there.
It's 5 years of research on that book.
I'll ask you this. How is this available? How can our viewers find out and get a copy of this?
Well, that's a good question because we printed 120 copies.
Okay.
We sold it at £20, and that's £20 at its cost to print that, publish that, and the 120 copies sold on the launch night.
Is that right?
That's right.
Is there plans to make more?
We printed another 70, and I think he's got about 6 left at the 70.
All right.
Yep.
Is there a good email address or something for your lodge that they could get a hold of you to order that?
Yep.
What would that be?
It's Lodge St Bride 579. It's on the web page,
Okay.
stbride579.co.uk.
Sounds good. And we will get that in the link as well.
Yep.
We've got about 15 minutes until our toast for this evening. Now, as we're talking about all this history in Scotland, one cool thing about the three of you, you've shared that I hopefully will one of these days. You've all got the chance to go over there and see all this cool history. Brother Patrick Craddock, you're kind of like my idol because you're doing this stuff all the time, nerding out professionally. Tell me a little bit about
idol
this.
and a nerd.
And a nerd.
In the
Same sentence.
That's awesome.
And you never flinched.
No.
Yeah. No.
So tell me a little bit about your trip because you got to go over there as well. And I hear you've got a picture over there now too, right?
That's a long story, that one. But he'll tell you about the story about when he was invited into our Grandmaster Mason's room.
Yes, I
Yeah,
can.
lots on
I
it.
can tell you that. So the reason that I ended up there is because of Jim. So Grand Lodge of England was getting ready to celebrate their 300th anniversary.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
they spent a ton of money on this event. So they invited every Grandmaster of every recognized jurisdiction. that
It was a
they had.
full production.
Full production. All we had to do was get to London,
Right.
and they had our hotel, our meals, the events, the entire thing. A
Wow.
huge production. So when the invitation came to say, do you want to come? Well, instantly the answer was yes. We knew that back at the annual communication when I was getting installed, and it was immediately after installation. Jim comes up and takes a picture, and he says, "Hey, are you going over to London for the 300th?" And I said, "Yes." And he stopped and he says, "If you're going to come that far, then why wouldn't you come up and see Scotland while you're already there?"
It's a fair question.
So, which immediately, I looked right back at him and said, let's figure out how to make this work. And so Jim had set up for my wife and I to fly into Glasgow, stay there in his town, go to St. Bride, and then we went to the communication of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. When you're a sitting Grand Master and you travel abroad, there's logistics that get put in place before you go. So letters
Sure.
get sent, permissions received, etc. And so they knew I was coming to the communication for the Grand Lodge of Scotland. So we get there early, take a tour of the place, etc. We go to lunch, and then after lunch, I was invited into the Grand Master's office. That's where my regalia was. So we were getting
Right.
dressed to go to lodge. And as we're doing this, here come in 3 past Grand Masters of Scotland, older gentlemen. You can tell that they're aristocracy just based by the way they speak, they dress, etc. And the confirmation that they were aristocracy was one of them was complaining about a banquet he was getting ready to go to. And he had a toast that he had to memorize. And his gripe was the toast is too long. He'll never get it memorized. He's going to get a word out of step and someone's going to be yelling at him for it. And one of the other older past Grand Masters looked at him and says, "Stop whining. Queenie's deaf. Say whatever you want." And I instantly stopped and looked. Did he just say what I think he just said? You can walk into the Grand Lodge of Scotland and see from the paintings on the walls the connections to the royal family that have existed within the Grand Lodge of Scotland, but you don't. it's one thing to look at a painting, and it's another thing to hear the conversations happen in the Grandmaster's office. But Jim and Pat both have been that connection for the Grand Lodge of Kansas and the relationship across the pond, and our relationship with Jim has been one that just every year continues to grow strong.
Yeah.
We have a Kansas Mason that's a member of the same bride. I mean, he ran off. There's been several of us that have gone to visit. There's several of us that have unfilled petitions to want to go back. And it's just a matter of making it. But what's amazing is Kansas Masonry traces its roots from Scotland. And so it's going back home. We don't look, speak, or operate the same in our lodges at all. But the character, compassion, and purpose behind what we do as craft masonry, you don't find a difference, I don't think.
That's beautiful. I love that. Brother Craddock, you're one that has taken many trips over there, and I doubt you're done, right?
No. That's still.
So what is it that captures you and really makes you want to get over there and do what you do?
Well, for me, it's still the connection with history.
Sure.
And Masonic history. But on top of that, now there are dear friends that you just needed an excuse to go see.
Sure.
And so to have that connection with an interest in history, with the Masonic experience that is exactly the same but totally different than what we have here.
Right.
And you will learn about Masonry from having that experience of enjoying Masonry beyond your grand jurisdiction, where they may do things a little differently. And that's exciting for me too, is to have that experience and then to share that experience with people.
Right.
And go, we're going to have an opportunity to do these things, see these things, visit these places. So that's what kind of drives me to do that.
It's a beautiful concept, how you're talking about that connection to history, but then you get kind of blindsided by those relationships that are just that much more important. In Freemasonry, we talk so much about traveling, and often it's hard to see that about going from one side of the state to another. How important would you say it is for Masons to travel, not just within their jurisdiction, but well beyond?
Hugely important. Whenever I talk to young Masons, and I'm not talking about 18, 19, 20-year-olds, but men that join in their 30s and 40s,
right,
it's important to become active in your lodge, but don't stand looking at the altar in that lodge with your back to the rest of Masonry.
Right.
Take the opportunity to visit another lodge in your county, another lodge in your jurisdiction, another lodge outside of your jurisdiction, another lodge internationally if you have an opportunity, because you will learn more about Masonry from that experience and the way others have that Masonic experience and welcome you as a brother into it, that you learn the universality of Masonry. I want to tell a real quick story, something I got to do this past weekend that meant a lot to me. I was invited to lecture at St. Albans Lodge in Texas. And in preparation for that, there was a young Mason who was a member of, or it was a student at Texas A&M. And he wanted to come, but he was young and didn't have much money for a dinner ticket. And I heard this story, and I was talking to the guy that was my host. That I said, "Look, tell him to come. I'm buying his ticket." And he said, "Well, why are you doing that?" And I said, "Because when I was a student living overseas, I didn't know it for a while, but I never bought a festive board ticket.
Wow.
Ever.
Yeah.
This is my opportunity to pay those men that influenced me back so much,
Right.
to do the same thing that was offered to me in the spirit of brotherly love and Masonry." And I jumped at that opportunity.
That's beautiful. I love that. Within that, we often get to see how Masonry makes the world a smaller place. And especially, it doesn't matter if you're going the next lodge over or the other side of the pond, Masonry has that beautiful aspect of you instantly have this bond with these guys. And I think that's something we all need to harness.
Mhm.
I guess when you talk historically about the Brothers of the Mystic Tie, there's something very real about that I think is hard to put into a written form, but there's something there. There's something powerful. And I totally agree with you. I think it's definitely worth getting as far as you can and meeting them.
I've got one other anecdote, if
Yeah.
you'll allow me, from my experience over there. When I moved to Wales to go to school, I lived in the Welsh dorm, only spoke Welsh language because I wanted to learn some of it. I didn't know at the time that I was really thick and couldn't learn languages that easily. But it was difficult for me living in a country where I knew no one really cared about me.
Right.
Until I found the lodge in town. And I remember the first time I went to that lodge meeting, I was welcomed like I had been a member of that lodge my entire Masonic life. And during the course of me being there, I was asked several times, Brother Craddock, would you reply to the visitor's toast? And I'm thinking, oh, well, I'm a young PhD student. They want to hear words of wisdom about Masonry and universality. And I spoke, about things. I was, very good, very good. Well, it took me about a year to really comprehend that they didn't care what I said. They just wanted to hear this accent. So, so yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, brothers, I want to thank you so much, firstly, for everything that you do for our craft, from all the way in Scotland and coming over here to Kansas, from the years of dedication that you have devoted to the craft in general, and then still being here for the brick and mortar work of the annual communication and helping Freemasonry move forward, and then popping in for some brown liquid on a Masonic podcast late at night. I appreciate everything you guys do. We always end this off with a live toast. Brother Craddock, could I get you to offer us a toast this evening?
Well, I'd be honored.
All right.
So, to the spirit of Freemasonry, to the fellowship and brotherhood that we all share, to the time that we have to enjoy together, and a safe return to our native lands, should we so desire.
Here, here. Cheers. Brothers, thank you again so much for joining me this evening. It's been a pleasure sitting and having this conversation with you, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Hey, you leave the
Pleasure.
door open, we'll crack it.
Oh, yeah.
Have more liquid on the table for you.
That was too long for this.
Everyone that joined in with us live this evening, thank you as well. Appreciate all you do in supporting the show. Until next time, we'll see you right back here. Keep saving history with Historical Light. Good evening.
Man, did you?